The Complete Dick Tracy, Volume 13, 1950 to 1951. So a couple of brief disclaimers before we get started. First of all, you can probably hear this in my voice already, but I still have this cold. In fact, I think it's getting a little bit worse. So I apologize if I sound a little bit hoarse or congested or whatever. It is what it is. I wish I sounded better, but I'm not going to wait a week to recover to film this video because then I'm going to get behind in my reviewing. So I'm just going to try and plow on through for this. Apologies. Secondly, in the previous video I did, in which I reviewed Dick Tracy Volume 1, I talked all about my history with Dick Tracy and why I was reading these books and embarking on this series, etc. And I'm not going to repeat all that here. You can go check that video out if you're interested. But I'm just going to jump right into this and talk about this volume. So, in comparison to Volume 1, which was a bit of a slog to get through, this volume was very readable. I mean, it was, It was an addicting read. The pages kept turning. You wanted to find out what was going to happen next. This is Dick Tracy at its finest. Obviously, it took Chester Gould a few years to figure out what he was doing, to both refine his art style and refine his narrative technique. But he's got it here. Because I had just gotten done with Volume 1, I tried to analyze this a little bit in my own head to try and figure out what makes these stories work so well, which were not in the early stories. And I think there's a few things going on. Number one is he's gotten much better at pacing the stories. He said in an interview somewhere, and again, this is something I remember from one of those Dick Tracy books I read in 1990. He said that he seldom plans a story out in advance. He says the best stories are the ones that I make up as I go along, because if I don't know where the story is going to go, then there's no way the audience is going to know where the story is going to go, so it keeps the stories from being predictable. And I was thinking about that as I read this volume and trying to figure out, okay, how much of this was him just making these stories up as he was approaching his daily deadline? How much of this was plotted out in advance? There are a couple weird twists and turns, which maybe I'll get around to talking about later, which indicate to me that maybe he was doing a lot of this on the fly. And yet, certainly the beginning of each story seems to me like he knows what he's doing. So he'll be wrapping up the previous storyline. He'll just kind of subtly introduce the bad guys. They'll simmer for a little bit in the background. He's building up the suspense. Then the confrontation, and Dick Tracy is trying to find them, and it all builds to a big shootout. And I don't know, maybe a fair amount of this is made up as he goes along, but the story beats seem very much there. Although in a number of these stories, there is this weird kind of fourth act, where just when you think things are wrapping up, the criminal all of a sudden escapes by some miraculous way, and then we go into this bizarre continuation of the story. That might be Chester Gould just making things up as he goes along. But okay, so there's that. There's the fact that these stories seem to be better paced and somewhat better plotted, whether he's making them up as he goes along or not. There's also a lot of suspense in these. Now, as was pointed out in the introduction by Max Collins, in the early Dick Tracy comics, the villains would usually set up some sort of death trap for Dick Tracy. And then Dick Tracy would be stuck in this sort of death trap that the villains had devised, and that would just simmer for a week or so in the daily strips until Dick Tracy found a way out of it. At this point in his career, Chester Gould has more or less abandoned those death traps for Dick Tracy. He thought maybe the audience was getting sick of them. Max Collins said he would come back to them later in his career. I guess we'll see how that goes as I work my way through this series. But at this point in his career, the death traps are still there. But it's not Dick Tracy who gets put into them. It's innocent bystanders, like child hostages or something like that. Or it's one of the villains will betray another one of the villains, so they'll put each other into the death trap. And that creates a lot more suspense, because if Dick Tracy is in the death trap, he's not, they're not going to kill off Dick Tracy. He's going to get out alive. But if one of the villains is putting another criminal into a death trap, you don't know if that other villain is going to get out alive. There is a surprisingly high body count in these Dick Tracy stories. So, Chester Gould, he's not going to kill Dick Tracy off, but any of the minor characters, all bets are off. You're reading this and you're like, ooh, okay, is this character going to get killed here, or is he going to survive? What's going to happen? And you are genuinely suspenseful as you turn the pages. And because I guess these were daily strips, where you had to kind of hook the reader and get him coming back every day to find out how the story was going to continue, Chester Gould really milks that suspense very expertly. But that brings me to another point, is that there is a surprisingly amount of violence, some of it a little bit on the gruesome side, in these strips. Now, granted, it doesn't really compare to comic books today, etc. But the thing to keep in mind with these strips is that these were published in the family newspapers. So, these were not like, these were coming into people's homes where the whole family could see it. The dad, the mom, the kids, etc. So yeah, there's a few different panels we could use to illustrate this. But here's one. So here's a villain. He's hiding out in the lockers trying to get a change of clothes. Here's some people who stumble upon him robbing the lockers. These are not other criminals. These are just innocent bystanders. And yeah, look at that. And then we find out, there's even a shot of their blood oozing out here. And we find out later that they were in fact killed by these brutal cracks on the head. That's just one example. There are several more examples of rather graphic violence in these strips, which, again, surprising for 1950 and 1951, and also surprising that these were in the family newspaper. Now, Max Collins, in his introduction, points out that this was actually happening at the same time there was that Senate crackdown on, or investigation into violence in comic books going on, which Max Collins says Dick Tracy was actually not touched by. Chester Gould got to continue just doing whatever he wanted to do right in the family newspaper. And Max Collins suggests that the reason that Dick Tracy was untouched is because by 1950, Dick Tracy was just such an institution in American pop culture that nobody thought about trying to mess with it or trying to rein him in. So yeah, I guess all of that is by way of background to these stories. Now maybe let's go in and look at them one at a time. We'll see how the time goes. As always, my camera has a 30-minute time limit. 30 minutes is the maximum video size I'm allowed to film on this camera. So I'll just talk about all the things that strike me as we go through the book, and then when I run out of time, I run out of time. So, excuse me. There's an introduction by Max Ellen Collins here, talking about the background to Chester Gould's life and some of these strips. I've already referenced some of those points already, and I may come back to this again. Yeah, and again, Dick Tracy was at the height of his popularity here, so there was a lot of merchandising associated with Dick Tracy. Bonnie Braves, who is born in these pages, had merchandise attached to her. Sparkle Plenty had dolls. Sparkle Plenty is another character, the Dick Tracy lineup. Yeah, sorry, another character in the Dick Tracy lineup's not the right word, huh? The Dick Tracy cast. There's a recap of some of the stories previously on Dick Tracy here. So, Dick Tracy's former sidekick, Pat Patton, gets promoted to become Chief Patton when the old Chief Brandon resigns. And then Sam Ketchum is brought on to be Dick Tracy's new sidekick. So yeah, this is an example of how the strip evolves, how the characters evolve. Dick Tracy and Tess Trueheart finally get married, etc. And then we open up to this volume here. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm sucking in a cough drop as I film this video to try and prevent myself from coughing a lot while I'm filming. Apologies if you can hear that shifting around in my mouth. Anyways, the first villain here is Blowtop. Actually, maybe I should do a little bit more background quickly here. By this stage in his career, and I guess you probably have to do this if you're doing a detective comic for as many years as Chester Gould was writing these stories. You can't have just villain after villain after villain. They all would get a little bit forgettable. So what Chester Gould eventually started doing is having his villains be very over the top, and each one having recognizable features and over the top caricatures. So Blowtop, we find out he's the brother of Flat Top, who was one of the famous Dick Tracy villains from the 1940s, who ended up getting killed. If memory serves, I think he ended up drowning. Is that right? Or, I don't remember. No, I think Dick Tracy shot him, right? I don't remember. It's not important. As a previous volume. Anyways, Blowtop is Flat Top's brother. And his distinguishing feature is that he always blows up over minor things. Now, as Max Collins points out in the introduction, one of the things that makes Blowtop's character so genius is that he doesn't blow up when the other characters are criticizing him. So here they're criticizing him for getting the marked money. So they say, "You, the big brain behind that $2 million express office robbery, and you get stuck. The boys slipped you the marked money, you sap." But he ends up blowing up at them because he's twirling the keychain. Right? So here's twirling the keychain. "Don't twirl that keychain! It makes me nervous. Ugh!" And then as the strip goes on, he usually uses ads like "ugh," "gosh," to the end of everything. "How many times have I told you not to breathe in my face? That's one thing I can't stand. Ugh! gosh. Oh, I don't know. What's a good way to read this? Ugh, gosh. Ugh, gosh. However you choose to read it. So, yeah, now, Blowtop ends up meeting up with... Oh, yeah, sorry. I shouldn't skip over this, huh? Blowtop has some sort of bomb goes off that causes Dick Tracy's house to burn up, along with Dick Tracy's hair. I mean, Dick Tracy survives, but not his hair. One of the things that Max Collins points out in the introduction, although I think I would have noticed this anyways, without benefit of it being pointed out, is how prominent fire is in so many of these stories. So this story and another story both involve people getting burned up. For whatever reason, I guess, fire was on Chester Gould's mind this year. So anyways, Vitamin Flintheart, who's a stage actor who's struggling to get work, eventually meets up with Blowtop. Max Collins talks in his introduction about what a great comic character Vitamin Flintheart was. I guess Vitamin Flintheart got introduced in the 1940s. Although Max Collins laments that this story and the next story are the last appearances that Vitamin Flintheart makes in the Chester Gould Dick Tracy comics. I guess Chester Gould just kind of forgot about him. Max Collins recounts a time when he asked Chester Gould why he had stopped using Vitamin Flintheart. And Chester Gould said, "Oh, I just used him not that long ago," not realizing that it had been 25 years since he last used Vitamin Flintheart. I guess as you get older, time starts to go faster. I can relate to that a bit myself. It's too bad that this is one of Vitamin Flintheart's last appearances in the Chester Gould Dick Tracy comics. His successor, who I think was Max Collins himself, brought Vitamin Flintheart back. But anyways. One of the other interesting things about these strips, I mentioned before there was a lot of violence in them. Dick Tracy and his men are not at all shy about using lethal force. And they don't always use lethal force purely in self-defense. They will use lethal force to catch escaping criminals. I don't know how much of that reflects the way police actually operate, or if times have changed since the 1950s or whatever. But it is different when you compare it to like the superhero comics of the 1950s, right? Because in the superhero comics, there was this big thing, like the superheroes were never supposed to kill anyone. So, like Batman and Superman, they could fight the villains, but they would never kill them. And it's funny to think that, those were the kind of comics that were getting cracked down in the 1950s. Whereas here is Dick Tracy in the family newspaper coming into everybody's homes, which is, not at all shy about killing bad guys. So there are plenty of examples where either he or the other police officers fire on, kill, or try to kill criminals who are running away. But here's one. The criminal is trapped in the house. He does shoot first, to be fair. But once the criminal shoots first, Dick Tracy said, "All right, he asked for it. Get back, men. Those cabins are made of fiberwood and plywood, so... Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. We caught another crook this way once. Yes, I think I remember some other Dick Tracy comics where he did something similar to this. Just sprays the Tommy gun to get a shot at somebody inside. And gets this guy. Oh, by the way, this reminds me. This is something I forgot to point out earlier, but this is excellent writing. So, actually, this whole thing is good. This illustrates how readable these are. So, Blowtop and his henchmen are here, and they're arguing again. And then, while they're arguing, the henchman just suddenly shoots Blowtop. I mean, that seems to come out of nowhere. And so then Blowtop is shot, but it's not the cops who got him. It's his own henchman. Okay, Joe, now grab that grip full of express company money. Let's go. So they grab the money. They go. And then they get in the car. How much money is in this grip, Joe? I would judge slightly over 900 grand. We'll divide it equally, won't we, Joe? Eh? Won't we, Joe? Joe, answer me. That look in your eye, Joe. How far is it to that cabin? And this is the last we see of this character alive. The next time we see her, she's a corpse they find in the back seat here. But Joe actually forgot to search her. So the police find a note on her body with the address where Joe is hiding out. Which brings me to maybe another feature of these stories is there's a lot of clues that fall into the police hands. So Dick Tracy and his men get very lucky a lot of times by just sloppy criminals or clues that just fall into their hands. I guess it keeps the story moving. And I don't know, maybe you could argue that real life is like that? Or what do you think? Do cops just get incredibly lucky a lot of the times? Do criminals just make a lot of dumb mistakes like this a lot of the time? Anyways, yeah, there's a lot of funny moments in this Blowtop story, which he's trying to get Vitamin Flintheart to launder his money. Vitamin Flintheart thinks that Blowtop is actually going to set him up with the stage production. Vitamin Flintheart buys a shrunken head from a man he meets in the street, and he gives him a shirt for it, not knowing that inside the shirt, Blowtop has hidden $5,000. So Blowtop, of course, is very upset when he finds out, but he can't let on why he's so upset, because Vitamin Flintheart doesn't know that he's laundering the money. Dear friend Blowtop, I'll buy you a new shirt. Stop this. Yeah, and a lot of other funny moments like that. But I don't want to go through and read out all the funny moments. That would spoil everything. Maybe I'll just point out that there's a lot of humor going on in these stories. But enough about Blowtop. I've used up almost all of my time, and I'm still on the first story. Second story is TV Wriggles, which again features Vitamin Flintheart in it, and also the B.O. Plenty family. There's B.O. Plenty, Sparkle Plenty, and what's her name again? Gertrude Plenty? I forget. So yeah, these are supporting characters who are introduced in the Dick Tracy stories and are used mainly for comic relief at this point. Although, like a lot of the stories in here, it can go from comic to dark very quickly. So the villain here is TV Wriggles, who is horning in on the television business. Sparkle Plenty is the new child star. So TV Wriggles is trying to exploit her. As was pointed out in the introduction by Max Collins, there are some dark overtones with the way he's getting a little bit handsy with Sparkle Plenty and some of these panels. And then, there's a Sparkle Plenty doll, which features prominently in a few of these panels, which was apparently, at the time these strips are being published, there was a real Sparkle Plenty doll, which was in the toy stores. So this was, a not too subtle tie into the toy line. But yeah, this is what I talked about before with kind of an unpredictable fourth act. So it looks, after all the tension is building to a final showdown with the police and TV Wriggles, TV Wriggles actually manages to escape and go on to do some more nefarious deeds, and eventually tries to get Sparkle Plenty again, where B.O. Plenty takes it upon himself to protect his daughter and comes after TV Wriggles with a gun, despite Dick Tracy's trying to tell him not to take on TV Wriggles. So this is what I mean with the tone shifting. Here we have a character who's mainly used for comic relief in this rather dark storyline where he's trying to protect his daughter from a kidnapper, or avenge the near death of his daughter from a kidnapper. Gets shot in the process. And then for many panels is in the hospital. As Max Collins said in his introduction, depending on how you look at it, this is either Chester Gould expertly milking the suspense, or just plain milking it, as a writer who had a daily strip to fill. Because this does go on for a few weeks, B.O. Plenty in the hospital. There is also a few different strips of Dick Tracy praying to God to save B.O. Plenty. So, I'm almost out of time. I'm not going to have time to really talk about this. But, again, this is something I picked up from reading those Dick Tracy books back in 1990. Chester Gould's Christian faith was very important to him. And it's somewhat ironic maybe that he became so associated with what was at the time considered to be a very violent comic. But I guess we can parse that theological issue another time. But he did occasionally have his characters just pray to God. So here the doctors say they've done all they can for him. Well, maybe they have. They're men. And when man fails, there's only one other place to turn to. That's to you. So, as a result of Dick Tracy praying, the pulse is definitely stronger. So Dick Tracy prayed, and now B.O. Plenty is making a recovery. So yeah, we could talk about the theology of this. I've never really felt comfortable in fiction with God intervening too much. I'm out of time.